As it was announced, this session we are going to have a final discussion from our very own Kate Cooper. Kate is a next global council member of the Chartered Institute of Governance. In fact, she was scheduled to join us in the morning during some other presentations, but she informed us that she had a flight to move from one area to another. So she would rather prefer to join us around this time. We are just going to have an hour session of presentation on emotional intelligence. And she will be doing that with our own Kofi Amagashie. Kofi is here, but when he speaks, so yes, we are going to do the same with Kofi. And there was a third person, Joe, but she couldn't join us because of the time changes that came in later on. So, Kate, we are all yes, and I hope you will also introduce yourself again whilst Kofi does it. Then we'll continue with the topic.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for letting me join you this afternoon. I hope you've all seen the short video that I made, which was really trying to describe what Kofi and I are trying to talk about this afternoon. And we entitled it Leading with Integrity. So I'd like to start by setting the sort of scene to what I think leaders need in order to be able to say, yes, I lead with integrity. How do we know that's what we're doing? And I think Kofi's going to talk particularly about the challenges of trying to be a leader who leads with integrity when perhaps those around you haven't the same high standard. Now, as a companion of the Institute of Leadership in the UK and former head of research there, we used to think a lot about integrity and what that meant and how you develop it. And as with all leadership development, every time you're thinking about becoming a better leader, I think you have to start with self-awareness. You have to say, well, what does integrity mean to me? How do I know I've got it? How do I know I recognize it? Why do I care about it? Because you are the starting point for the decisions that you make as a leader, as a manager, that other people could judge as to whether you are leading with integrity. So you have to be really open to understanding yourself, to knowing yourself, to judging yourself, to getting feedback from other people. So how do we go? How do we go about this degree of self-awareness? How do we develop it? Well, there are loads of tools online. I'm sure some of you have done personality tests, whether that's Myers-Briggs, whether Belbin team roles, 16PF. So much stuff out there that it's not about labeling you. It's about trying to get you to understand yourself better. So I think try and find all the ways you can of gaining insight into you. And if you find something that you don't agree with, or you think that, the test is wrong, check it out, ask colleagues, because other people don't always see us, as we know, the way we see ourselves. So be inquisitive, be curious about who you are, the sort of person you are, the sort of colleague you are. I think we then have to think about, well, what sort of leader am I? Now, anybody who's done any sort of leadership workshops, I'm sure you all know that there are supposed to be different sorts of leadership for different sorts of occasion and different sorts of leadership for different environments. And yes, there is a clear message I'd have, which is that leadership has to adapt. You have to adapt as a leader to the situations and the people you find yourself in. However, I think on the whole, and research bears me out on this, we do tend to default to the leadership style that we like, best suits us, work best, whatever it is. So understand what that is for you. What does it mean to you to be a leader? How do you think a leader behaves? So we've got two things now. We're looking at ourselves, we're thinking about leadership. And I think until we can move into that area of saying, yes, I lead with integrity, we really have to know our values. What matters to us? Now, unfortunately, Jo Britton couldn't be here with us today, but she does a lot of work on values. She does free workshops on LinkedIn. Please do connect with her and have a look at some of the things she does around values. But one of the useful things, I think, is to list all the things that matter to you: honesty, caring, kindness, punctuality, all the things that you care about as a person at work, and then start reducing them. Get them to your top 3, your top 5. And that starts telling you what you care about. Is ambition important? Is earning money important? Is making sure that everybody keeps in a job? Is achieving very crucial to you, or is staying where you are and seeing things grow and nurturing them? Whatever your values are, start thinking about them so you can describe them. So I think the 3 key things there is this idea about being self-aware, understanding your preferred leadership style, and really start thinking about what your values are so you can say them straight away if somebody asks. So now I'd like to bring Kofi in here. What do you think here? What would you like to add to that?
Well, thanks very much, Kate, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to be speaking to my own people, although from a distance. So that's very nice. Thanks for inviting me, Dr. Asari and Kate. Well, Kate, I think you raise probably the most important aspect of success in business today: leadership, values, ethics, emotional intelligence. You bring all those together. And why is it more important than ever today in business or in public administration? I think the environment in which we operate today around the world, the global environment in our local environment, the global affects the local environment, is characterized by something we call VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. What do I mean by volatile? By volatile, I mean the rate of change of information around the world today is the highest it has ever been in the history of mankind. And that's driven mainly by technology, and particularly the internet, right? Because when I was growing up, if I got the newspaper for my father in the morning, that was the news he had at 7 o'clock in the morning. The next time that news would change would be 7 o'clock the next day. But let's just take you guys today. You just came in from a break. Before you went out to the break, you may have looked at your phone and seen a piece of news. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you come back, that news has changed, depending what you read. So the rate of change of information today is very fast. So it's a volatile world. It leads to uncertainty because we are not sure about what today means or what information we have. Is that true or not? Right? Because depending on what you read, where you read it, you will have a point of view. So it's an uncertain world. It leads to complexity because now there are multiple decision factors we have to take into making a decision. What happens this, what happens there, what happens there? And then this leads to a lot of ambiguity. And by that, we mean one event can have multiple meanings. Let's take the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. A month after that invasion, nearly 2 years ago, the Western powers put an embargo on Russian oil. It meant if you were an oil-producing country, fantastic. If you were not, it was bad for you. A month later, Russia embargoed the port of Odessa, which is the biggest export port for wheat. Therefore, all of a sudden, prices of wheat, bread went up in countries. But if you were a wheat farmer in the Punjab in India, it meant you were making a lot of money. So that's the ambiguity. As a result of this, Surviving and thriving in this business climate means that organizations, and by inference, leaders, need to continue to come up with new ideas to ensure their products and services are relevant to their customers and stakeholders, which means there's a lot of opportunity for people to do things that may not be right because of the pressures that are put on them. Right? And this is where your own personal integrity, your values, and your emotional intelligence, your resilience comes into play. Because it's very easy to do the wrong thing for immediate organizational and therefore personal gain. And Kate touched on it. When we talk about emotional intelligence, what does it mean? Does it mean different things to different people? Kate made a very important point. You must be, first of all, self-aware. What is it that I believe in? How do I act? Because only if you are self-aware I think emotional intelligence means you have to have the ability to monitor one's own and other people's emotions and discriminate between different emotions, label them appropriately, and use that emotional information to guide your thinking and behavior. Because if you don't, because of this VUCA environment, people will be stressed. What does that mean? How do you know somebody is stressed? How will they react? How will you react when you're stressed? Will you start shouting at your subordinates? Will you decide to cut corners? Do you say that we're an ethical organization, but then actually what you do is unethical? And what do ethics mean? What does ethics in business mean? And again, Kate raised a number of points: honesty, integrity, loyalty, fairness, trustworthiness, responsibility, accountability. If I was to ask you, for example, Kate, are you an honest person? Do you consider yourself an honest person?
I do my best, yes.
Right. Okay. Show me. Right? Very difficult. You can't. I can only discern that if I was in a situation with Kate where she behaved honestly or dishonestly.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, Kofi, about it doesn't matter how honest I think I am. If the people I work with don't think I'm honest or don't trust my honesty, then essentially I'm not.
Exactly. Or you're fair. You say, I'm a fair person. But
Yeah.
okay, I'm a fair person, but everybody sees that as your supervisor, I'm being an Eve from Ghana. Only Eves get promoted in my department. But I say to people, I'm a fair person, right? I can believe that and say that to myself, but it must manifest. People must see it. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? So I will pause there, Kate, and see whether you have any comment or anybody has any questions from the floor.
I think I'd just like to pull together the interesting point you made about us operating in a volatile VUCA environment. Not only does that make us stress, Kofi, does it? It gives us so many competing paradigms, different opinions and views about what is right, what is good, what is correct. And I think that adds to the problems perhaps we have in identifying our values. Absolutely. Because they're not straightforward anymore.
Absolutely. And Kate, this raises another issue, very important issue, that in work, whether we're in the public sector, we're in the private sector, we get ethical dilemmas at work. And the interesting thing is that ethical dilemmas are not about a choice between right and wrong. right? If it's a choice between right and wrong, and somebody makes the wrong decision, that does the wrong thing, they're telling you who they are. They're not honest, they're not ethical. Oftentimes, in fact, almost all the time, ethical dilemmas are between right and right, right? Between right and right. And why is that? Four things, I believe, that contribute to that: ignorance, discrimination, management pressure, and personal ambition, right? Ignorance. You don't take the time to understand how people feel, what is important to them. Discrimination, right? I'll only promote Aves, I'll only promote men, I won't promote women, right? There's nothing technically wrong with giving the job to that other person, but right and right. It's between right and right. Management pressure. People say the boss says we need to get this account. So how are we going to do it? Well, what if I go and bribe the salesperson in the other company, right? Eventually they buy from you, but is it right? Or your personal ambition? I've got 4 kids, I want to send them to the private school and I need the money. I want to buy the next biggest car. So I'm going to cut corners at work. I'm going to pay the bride. I'm going to take a bribe, right? It's always between right and right. If it's between right and wrong, it's not an ethical dilemma. You've made a decision one way or the other. And I think, as you say, Kate, it's about this pressure of the world we live in today, right? I almost pity young people who are coming into this new work environment because it's only going to get more and more pressured.
But you make a good point there about entitlement. I'm sure you weren't following the MP scandal in the UK, but so many MPs, our members of parliament, were found to be making ridiculous claims on their expenses. And the most ridiculous was one MP claimed that the government should pay him for a duck house, a house for his ducks. Now, as Kofi says, that just to us, perhaps from the outside, just thinks, Ron, you shouldn't be buying a duck house with taxpayers' money. But to them, they're feeling we're not adequately rewarded. We worked very hard. Actually, expenses are just really a bit more of your salary. So you start convincing yourself, because everyone else is doing it, if you like, or because it's been done for a long time, that you are right. If somebody said this is corruption, I think many people would be horrified. No. We all claim on expenses. We all know we do that. And that's one, I think, to add to that, often, for example, some countries put much more weight on a spoken contract. Other countries really only go with a written contract. So both would be very offended or feel that the other country had done something wrong and bad and lacked integrity if they broke a verbal contract or they broke a written contract. They would both feel they had right on their side. So you're absolutely right. You know, it's right and more right, or right and different right often in making these decisions.
Exactly.
So maybe some people have some comments or questions for us. That'd be useful or interesting.
Yeah. So can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. So before we invite more questions, I would also want to just give some few commentary on this thing issue we are discussing today, what has to do with emotional intelligence. And basically, it is one of the key areas as an institute we are also focusing on. We have traveled, but I made mention of traveling with MCBs and some BCBs outside the country, and the kind of attitude, the kind of we went through. In fact, Reverend Doctor, you were
Doc, could you move closer to the mic?
Okay, sure. So, Doc, you were not with us when we traveled, but you had every report for the 15 days that was spent outside Ghana. And you realize it has a lot to do with emotional intelligence and people understanding how to react to issues. So we are in the right place to have this discussion on emotional intelligence. So I'll begin with my question. So because the microphone is a bit of an issue now, if you have a question, we can give you the opportunity to come closer here in front to ask your question.
Excellent.
So they will be able to also hear from where they are. And with the questions that are being asked, as they also address it, if you also have any other comments from here, you can also be given the opportunity to also address same. So I'll begin with my question. Yes, Kofi, you know, whilst you were making your point, you made mention of favoritism issues with trying to favor an individual based on being of the same tribe or of the same ethnic gender. And I would want to find out is how does culture or tribe affect our emotions or our emotional intelligence towards others?
Well, I think that we feel a sense of belonging with certain other people, and that might be tribe, it might be gender, it might be the football team we support, it might be the way we dress, it might be because they are our friends. So the point is you've got to become aware of your own biases because we all have biases, right? I was interviewing a student today, a potential student today from Pakistan to my university, and we were just to lighten the mood at the beginning. I said, "Did he like football?" And he said, yes. Which team did he support in English Premier League? And he said, Tottenham Hotspur. And then he asked me, he said, sir, who do you support? And I said, Liverpool. And he goes, oh, I made a mistake. He was very aware that people can be biased, right? So I think that we've got to look deep within ourselves. And this is what Kate was talking about, self-awareness. Understand what your biases are. Biases in themselves are not a bad thing because we all have affiliations with different people and different things. It becomes a bad thing when you do not apply it. You apply it in a bad way. You apply it in a subjective way, right? It affects your decisions at work, right? In terms of making decisions around promotions or who does what, etc., etc. That's why you need clarity about the measurement. If there's clarity about how you are going to select people, and it does not involve tribe or which football team to support, then stick to that. And if the person who is not your kinsperson gets it, then good luck to them.
Okay, so well, I want to ask my last question. Then, if you have any other question, you can raise up your hand. Then I would invite you to come closer to ask your question. So this one goes to Kate. When it comes to emotional intelligence, what are the main points that I would have to look out for when it comes to emotional intelligence?
Sorry, could you repeat that? It's the microphone's distorting it a bit. Can you hear?
Yeah, so I want to find out when it comes to emotional intelligence.
Oh, right, yeah.
The main points do I have to look out for?
Right. Okay, thank you. It is a very clear question. It was my listening that was poor. I think, first of all, as Kofi said briefly before, with emotional intelligence, the starting point has to be when you feel any emotion, whether that's joy or anger or irritation, ask yourself recognize it, ask yourself where it's coming from, and remember that actually you can do something about it. You don't have to just give yourself over to it. Oh, I'm angry. It's not my fault. That person made me angry. At some point, you recognize that you have a responsibility for your own emotions. You know what's going to make you happy, make you sad. And then you're able to, in that split second, say, oh, why is this happening? Is there anything I can do about it? What can I do about it? So that to me is absolutely step one of emotional intelligence, recognizing and understanding that they're not in control of you. You can be in control of them. Once you've got that understanding of your own emotions, you can then start looking at other people and witness and observe how they respond to certain situations and how in control or otherwise they are of their emotions. And as Kofi just said, the boss that's had a bad day and starts shouting at everybody or ordering people around in a very sort of autocratic way, that's not somebody who's on top of their emotional intelligence. So it's recognizing your own, recognizing them in others, understanding that they're not in charge of you, you're in charge of them. And then being thinking about all the time how useful it is, being understanding yourself in situations, and use them in networking, in conversations, and be able to say to people, oh, that's really irritating me, or I'm finding that quite challenging, and with an honesty that really then conveys to the people that you work with that you're in charge of your emotions, you're in charge of yourself, and indeed you'll be a great role model then, as somebody who doesn't lose their temper, as somebody who doesn't get overwhelmed with sadness or despondency, that somebody who can come into work and actually be relied on, be trusted to be more or less the same sort of decision maker every day. And that's the person, as Kofi's just described, who makes as much as they can objective decisions, whether that's about recruitment or anything else. It's that somebody who is on an even keel, as we'd say, who we can predict to behave in a similar way every day. And as I say, we trust to behave and make the right decisions.
Absolutely. And Doc, can I add to that? Because I think Kate has really articulated this well. In that, with emotional intelligence, I believe there are 4 pillars, right? And it's that, first of all, you've got to look at yourself. That's the starting point. Recognize the emotions, as Kate said. And that means then you have to be able to regulate those emotions, right? So if a particular thing gets me angry, and I know that when I'm angry, I explode, then I begin to regulate that. It doesn't mean I don't feel angry, but then I say, okay, I'm angry. So Kofi, when you're angry, don't make a decision. Keep quiet until the anger has subsided. Then I can make a comment. And even as I'm nearly 60. If you had this conversation with me when I was 20, I wouldn't have known what emotional intelligence was. So it's about recognizing in yourself emotions, then being able to regulate them. Now, only then can you move external and be in the social, right? Because once you can recognize emotions in yourself, you can recognize it in others. And at that point, you can show empathy, you can show organizational awareness, and being a service-orientated leader. And only then can you actually begin to manage relationships. You can become an inspirational leader. You can develop others. You can influence people without aggression, without emotion. You can be a change catalyst. You can be a conflict manager, right? And then you can build the bonds of teamwork and collaboration, which moves your organization forward.
It's an interesting point there, Kofi. I mean, it was a guy called Daniel Goleman who really made emotional intelligence a big agenda item for us scholars of management and leadership. And a lot of the research done around that was in the 1990s, so not that long ago, showed or demonstrated that up to that point we'd always thought it was the intelligent, it was the brainy people that got on in organizations.
Right.
We'd expect the CEO of a company to be the cleverest. But what Dolman and others' research showed was that actually the more emotionally intelligent you were, the more successful you were likely to be. And when you think at its very heart, if you have high emotional intelligence, you're socially skilled, you're good at relationships, not only with yourself, but with the people about you. So it's not surprising, is it, that they're the people that get on in organizations?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so from Kate, you made mention of, and I'm just making this as an emphasis, that you have a responsibility to your own emotions. For your own emotions, nobody controls that. So you have a responsibility to your own emotions. And Kate also made us understand that one, you have to understand your emotions. You have to understand the emotions of others. And you also have to understand how useful it is to even understand your own emotions. But before we get the next question, Kofi, you made mention of 4 pillars. And with the 4 pillars, you made mention of looking at yourself being the first point, and regulating your own emotions and how you respond to your own emotions. What other point can you say under this, the remaining 3 pillars?
Okay, so 4 pillars: self-awareness, self-regulation,
Okay.
then social awareness, and then relationship management. So that's the thing. You start inside, and then you go outside and be able to.
Want him to repeat again?
So it's
Can you repeat
self-
the 4 pillars again?
self-recognition,
So we write it. Yes.
self-recognition, self-regulation.
Okay, so
Then,
Kofi, sorry.
yes.
I would want you to repeat the 4 pillars again. Start at yourself, then go to the text so that we can write it.
Okay, so you start with yourself and you basically become socially aware. You recognize your emotions. That's pillar number 1.
Okay.
Then pillar number 2 is being able to regulate your emotions. Okay? Then only then can you go outside and basically have social recognition. I can now recognize emotions in others around me and understand what it is they're going through. I can show empathy, right? And then only then can I begin to manage relationships, i.e., regulate the environment around me. So if people are in conflict, I know that some get upset, some withdraw. I can then go in because I understand all those emotions and be a good conflict manager. I'm not going to take sides. I'm going to say, hey, let me listen to you. It's like when you're sitting in a room. Kate and I are both lecturers, right? You can tell if you have empathy with students, you can tell a student who is confused just by the look on their face. And now you will draw them out, or you will stop and reiterate the point. That's basically managing relationships outside. So it's self-recognition, self-regulation, social recognition, and social regulation.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Any question from us? Question? Any question from us again?
It must be because Kate has been so brilliant. There are no questions.
Any question
just
again?
Sorry,
Okay,
I would just
continue.
like to add to that. Often people like me and Kofi, we present these models that are well researched and they've been put into practice, and emotional intelligence is one of them. And there are 4 steps or 5 pillars, or whoever's take on it. But it's offered to us as a sort of a linear progression that at some day that we're going to be great, we're going to be perfect, we're going to get.
I think the point Kate was
right. And I think one of the things about and that actually, rather than trying to, get ourselves perfect before we start trying to help other people. Put them in tandem, make them parallel processes.
Absolutely. They don't happen in linear. It's a mess. But become aware of it.
Oh, well, absolutely. I think that starting point of knowing, I think also there's a lot of, those of you who follow LinkedIn or other TikToks about management and leadership, there's a lot of talk about vulnerability and people, managers showing that they're vulnerable and leaders show that they're vulnerability. And I think that, however much, support one gives that, I think that what we're actually saying is that we're all works in progress. And some days our emotions are difficult to manage and we can't perhaps think about other people. Other days we're on top of things and then we can.
Okay, so yes. Can you come forward? Can you come forward?
Okay, so
yes,
thank you very much for the opportunity. Please, I have a question. And I think a lot of this question will resonate with a lot of the practitioners in the local governance system here. I think Kofi made the point that ethical dilemma is an entanglement between right and right. So two rights. Now, my question is, to what extent does institutional values contribute to either ethical leadership or creating ethical dilemmas or dilemma situation? And I want to explain that we have values as institutions and rules that spells out what ought to be done. So these are right and wrong, these are right. But then you have situations where maybe as a coordinating director, your chief executive wants you to do something that you know that this ain't it, this ought not to be done. But then you know that if you decline, it will go against you. So in one respect, it's a certain right that if you go against will not inure to your benefit. But then you also know the rules and the regulations that these are the things that you need to do. So if you have an institution that have values and then the practice, as it were, goes against the values, then you as the leader, where do you stand?
Kate, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll start. I think we actually did some research at the Institute of Leadership on this very subject of values and the extent to which people's personal values are the same as the organization's values. Now, what we actually found out was that often values in organizations are just set by a few senior leaders and they're not really owned by everybody who works in the organization. So you have a set of values that you're given almost. But if you are aware of what matters to you and what's important, and you've been working on your emotional intelligence, your ability to articulate what's going on, I think the sort of situation which you're presented with, purchasing manager wants you to buy something that's not ethically sourced, or somebody wants you to do something cheaply, although it goes against the organization's values. How honest the organization is about its values, how meaningful they are, will emerge in the conversations that you have to have about them. You have to be bold and speak up. You don't have to speak up angrily or aggressively, more in sorrow than in anger. But there will be other like-minded people that you can talk to and say, look, this is a problem that I'm having. Who can we find? And get allies. And don't think you're a lonely whistleblower. No, there will be people in the organization who share your values, and talk to the person concerned and say, this is going against my values. I'm sure you don't want to do that. Or how can we make this work so my values aren't compromised? But you've got to, I think, be brave enough to have that, to say it, and not either put up with it and say, I didn't have any choice, because of course you had a choice, or leave the organization, which is worse because you haven't helped the organization get better. So it's the brave and difficult decision to speak up.
Before you come in, I want you to also add this whilst you are answering this. Emotional intelligence and attitude. Emotional intelligence and attitude. Right. Throw more light as well also on it whilst you try to answer the first question.
Sure. I'll start with the last bit, emotional intelligence and attitude. Kate said something there. You can react without, you can disagree without being disagreeable, right?
Yes.
Okay. And some people call that passive aggressive, but I don't. You can disagree without being disagreeable. I can, how many of you, when I was scared about a report or from school or having done something and I knew my old man, you might give me the spank or something like that. You know what? I was prepared for the spanking, but when he said to me, I am very disappointed in you, it broke my heart, right? So that was him not being aggressive, but he had disagreed with me. So emotional intelligence does not necessarily mean that you must lie down and be trodden upon, but it also doesn't mean that you must come out punching like Bukom Banku, okay, who is a boxer in Ghana, right? You must measure your reaction, and it must count in the end, right? What you do. So going back to the original question there, I see the dilemma you have, right? Because as Kate said, yeah, you must stand up. But in some cases, in most cases, in a place like Ghana, it's going to affect your ability to earn because you might get sacked and then you might get labeled, if you're on local government system, as somebody who shouldn't be employed because you're always going to come and cause trouble, right?
Yes.
So there is a problem here. The problem being that your question was around organizational values and leadership. And Kate started this talk with looking at leaders, right? I give you an example, and I use this often. And this happened to be a friend of mine some years ago. We were having a barbecue at his place, and he was smoking a cigarette. He used to smoke in those days. And the kids were playing in the back, and his kids were about 15, 16 years old. And we went round to get something from the shed, and his son and two friends were smoking a cigarette, right? And he said to them, you should never, how dare you smoke a cigarette? Cigarettes will kill you, boom, boom. Meanwhile, he had a cigarette in his mouth, right? So here's him saying that these are the values, but he was smoking. And later I said to him, I'm not surprised your son smokes because you tell him not to smoke, but you're smoking a cigarette. So in the workplace, those dilemmas happen. And you have a decision to make. You have to decide, can I live with this? And this is the proverbial, if you drink from the devil's cup once, right? Then you're complicit. And today, I said we live in a volatile world driven by the internet and information. Today, it is very difficult to keep information secret. So if a leader is not behaving in a manner consistent with the values of the organization, you have loads and loads of ways to bring that to the fore without compromising yourself. You have to decide whether it is easier for you to compromise your values or to stand up against this. And it starts with all of us. The organizational values are only brought to life. An organization is an inanimate object. Without you in it, it doesn't exist. Right? It doesn't exist. So you have the responsibility. Doesn't matter whether you're in a position of formal leadership or not. You have the responsibility to live the values of the organization. If you're not prepared to do that, then don't complain. It's a hard decision. It's not easy. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Okay. Yes, it answers the question, and that is why it's difficult for people to make decisions. So, for example, if I refuse to make that choice, I can be transferred. You did mention that your ability to earn can be tempered with, and you see, districts are different. So there are districts that have resources, well endowed. There are districts that are less endowed. So once I decide not to take the action, I can find myself in a district that is
You could be on the border with Burkina Faso, right? Yeah. So I understand that. But today we have the tools. We've got the internet, we've got social media. We didn't have that long time ago. Why is it that this brilliant officer has now been transferred to a backwater, right? If your team is with you on the values and they've grown them up, they would have to end up transferring everybody in your team. You create a problem for them.
Yeah. You need allies.
Yes, you need allies. It's not easy. It's not easy at all.
Okay, so we'll take
Unfortunately, I have a hard stop now at 5.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
I have another meeting. Well, I'll be happy to come back again.
okay, so we want to take just the last question, then after that we can allow you to go whilst we continue the discussion from here.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine is on the last question. As leaders, what are the best practices?
The best practices.
Yes, please. In line with the last speaker situation.
All the research that I've done over the years, that people are very tolerant of their leaders, of their managers, if they think they're doing their best, they're trying to do a good job. That is incredibly important. That they do not put self-interest above the good of the team. So managers that, hold training at time that's convenient for them or near their home or those sorts of things, people really notice and really don't like. And also managers that do what they'll say they're going to do. Now, these aren't complicated things. This isn't knowledge of strategic models or the marketing mix. It's doing your best, not putting yourself first or above your team, and delivering on your promises. And I think if we'll work at that all the time, we'll become those colleagues, or we'll have those colleagues that Kofi's just talked about. It's, doing what you say you're going to do because you then are trustworthy. And there's nothing better than a manager that's trusted.
Okay, so on these notes, Kate, we want to say a very good thank you for making time to join us for this exciting session. Kofi Amagashie, it's Kofi Amagashie. The way you were doing Kofi is Kofi Amagashie. We are also
Kofi Amagashie, yes.
Yes. Amagashie.
Yes.
Okay, Kofi Amagashie. Yes, so we are also happy joining us this time, and subsequent sessions will make more time. So at least you can have this conversation over and over and over again. God bless you all for joining us here in Ghana. We'll continue the discussion from here. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Very
Thanks,
much.
Kate.
It's been
Kate,
lovely
I'll talk to
see
you
you all.
later in the week.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.